Have you ever felt completely safe in your own home, only to realize in one terrifying moment that the walls you trusted to protect you might be hiding something far more sinister? Tonight, we're going to explore 7 real encounters that shattered people's sense of security forever. But more importantly, we're going to understand why these experiences haunt us so deeply, why the violation of our personal space creates psychological wounds that never fully heal, and what these stories reveal about the darkest aspects of human predation. This isn't just about what happened to these people. This is about understanding the deeper horror that lives in the space between safety and terror. Welcome to the dark hour. Let's begin with something that might disturb you more than any ghost story ever could, because this is about the living, and the living can be far more terrifying than anything supernatural. When Clara introduced her friend to that couple looking for a dog sitter back in 2017, she thought she was doing something kind, helping a newcomer make connections in a small Illinois town. What she didn't know was that she was introducing her friend to predators who had been perfecting their hunting ground for years. The house itself was a trap from the beginning. Think about it carefully. A 70s brick ranch, outdated and falling apart, but equipped with cameras everywhere. Not just outside for security, but inside too, in hallways, living rooms, the kitchen, even positioned at the kitchen table. The couple claimed it was for insurance purposes, because they sold firearms from their home. But let's examine what was really happening here. These weren't security cameras in the traditional sense. These were surveillance tools designed to monitor every movement of whoever was inside that house, to track their patterns, to watch them when they thought they were alone. The young woman who agreed to house sit didn't realize she wasn't being hired for a job. She was being studied from that very first meeting, when the couple sized her up with those full body scans instead of making normal eye contact, when they opened doors without explanation and let her look inside like they were showing her a cage rather than giving her a tour. They were evaluating her, not as an employee but as prey. They were determining if she would be easy to manipulate, if she would follow instructions, if she would be too afraid to question what was happening around her. The psychology of this kind of predation is chilling when you understand it. These weren't impulsive criminals. They were methodical. They understood that the best way to trap someone is to make them feel like they chose to be there, to give them just enough comfort that they'll ignore the warning signs their instincts are screaming at them. The young woman even acknowledged she felt uncomfortable with all the cameras, but she wanted to make connections in this new town. She wanted to earn money. She convinced herself it was fine because people do this all the time. We talk ourselves out of our own safety because we don't want to seem paranoid or judgmental. And this is where the real horror begins, not with what eventually happened, but with the careful orchestration of events designed to isolate and terrify. The first night was fine because they wanted her to relax, to let her guard down. The second night, one camera went offline, the one watching the driveway. Not a coincidence, not a Wi-Fi issue. This was deliberate. They wanted to see how she would react to losing that sense of security. Would she panic? Would she investigate? Would she call them? Her response told them everything they needed to know about how to proceed. When the dogs started barking frantically at 10 at night, running to the fence line that backed up to the woods, something was out there. Not a random animal, not a coincidence. Someone was there, someone the dogs recognized as a threat, someone who had probably been there before. The couple had been testing the property, testing the dogs' reactions, testing how much noise it would take to wake their target. And when she blocked the doggy door with a chair, they learned something else. She was smart enough to be cautious, but not smart enough to leave. The next morning revealed the true horror of her situation. That chair she had pushed in front of the door, the one that weighed a decent amount, had been moved 5 feet away to the corner of the room while she slept. Let that sink in for a moment. Someone had been inside that house while she was sleeping. Someone had moved. Furniture had walked through those rooms, had stood in that hallway, perhaps had even stood in the doorway of the bedroom watching her sleep. The dogs had somehow gotten outside even though the door was blocked, which means whoever moved that chair knew the house well enough to let the dogs out first to avoid them, barking and waking her up. This is the moment where most people's minds rebel against the truth. Her friend Clara tried to convince her that maybe she hadn't pushed the chair as much as she thought. This is what we do when confronted with something too terrible to accept. We create alternative explanations. We doubt our own memories. We choose to believe in our own mistakes rather than accept that someone violated our space. But she knew, deep in that primitive part of her brain that evolution designed to keep us alive, she knew someone had been there. The decision to stay was driven by a different kind of fear. Not the fear of what might happen if she stayed, but the fear of being wrong, of overreacting, of seeming crazy, of losing the job and the connection and having to explain to everyone why she left. This is how predators win. They don't just rely on physical force. They rely on social conditioning, on our desperate need to be reasonable and polite and not cause trouble. They count on us choosing the discomfort of danger over the embarrassment of being paranoid. And then all 4 cameras went offline simultaneously. Not 1, not 2, all 4. The probability of this being a technical malfunction approaches 0. This was a coordinated attack, a deliberate blinding of the one thing that gave her any sense of security. And notice the timing. It happened after dinner during those quiet evening hours when she would be settling in, when her alertness would be naturally declining, when she would be most vulnerable. When she texted the couple to let them know, hours passed with no response. They weren't on vacation enjoying themselves too much to check their phones. They were close by, probably watching the house, waiting to see what she would do without the cameras, without any eyes on the outside world. Close to midnight, the dog scrambled to the doggy door again. By now, she had learned to recognize this as a warning, but what choice did she have? Run outside in the dark, call the police and tell them what? That she heard a noise, that the dogs were barking, that she felt afraid, so she did what seemed reasonable. She got the dogs inside. She took a picture of the chair blocking the door to prove to herself she wasn't imagining things. Later, and then she heard the thump from the back room. This is the moment where everything changes, where the abstract fear becomes concrete reality. She describes feeling a presence in the room, a change in the atmosphere, a white noise that breaks the stagnance of silence. Anyone who has ever felt this knows exactly what she means. It's not something you can explain to someone who hasn't experienced it. It's not hearing or seeing. It's a deep knowing that you are not alone, that something is occupying space nearby, that the air itself has changed because another consciousness has entered. Environment. And here's what's truly terrifying about this situation. When she called out asking who was there and got only silence in response, she was probably just feet away from someone who was standing completely still. In that darkness, someone who had been waiting in that room, possibly for hours, someone who was deciding in that moment whether to attack or wait longer. The fact that she got no response tells us this person was disciplined, controlled, not acting on impulse but following a plan. The text from the wife changed everything, and this is where the psychological torture reaches its peak. At almost 2 a.m. Florida time, the wife texts, "Don't worry about the cameras, you're safe." How did she know to send that message at that exact moment? How did she know the cameras were what was worrying her, and why phrase it as "you're safe" when the young woman hadn't mentioned being unsafe, because they were watching, not through the offline cameras but through some other means, or they were there in person, close enough to know what was happening inside that house. The second text was pure manipulation, asking her to check if the garage door to the inside was open. The door she was being asked to check was in the back room where she had just felt that presence. They knew someone was in there. They were trying to force her into that room, and when she didn't respond, the wife texted again. "I know it's late, but can you please check on this for me as I'm worried?" The psychological pressure of this is immense. She's being made to feel responsible for the couple's peace of mind, being guilted into putting herself in danger to ease their supposed concern. Then came the text that revealed the full extent of the surveillance. "I see you're up. Can you please go in and check?" The cameras were supposedly offline, but somehow the wife could see her. Either they had hidden cameras she didn't know about, or they were physically close enough to see through the windows, or both. She was being herded, like prey being driven toward a trap, with each text message acting as another fence forcing her toward that back room. When she finally opened the door and saw the garage door was in fact open, leading to that dark space beyond, she was at the final stage of the trap, and then her phone lit up with a notification, providing just enough light to reveal what was waiting. An arm pressed against the wall right next to the door. Someone was standing therein the darkness of the garage, just inches from where she would have been if she had walked through to close that door. The person was positioned perfectly to grab her the moment she stepped through. This wasn't a random intruder. This was someone who knew the layout, who had positioned themselves with precision, who had been waiting with inhuman patience. Her escape was pure survival instinct, but even that was contaminated with horror. As she fumbled with her keys at her car, the garage door started opening, slowly revealing the man squatting in the corner behind a box. He had been there the entire time, waiting in position while the texts were being sent, while she was being manipulated into approaching him. And the position he was in, squatting behind a box right next to the door she was supposed to close, that shows clear intent. He wasn't there to steal, he was there for her. The police found nothing because by the time they arrived, everyone had time to leave and clean up. No signs of forced entry because the people who entered had keys. They knew the property. They possibly owned the property. And then came the final confirmation. As she drove away 4 days earlier than the couple said they would return, she saw a car with no headlights pull into the driveway. When she texted the wife about it, the response was immediate. "I know." Not surprise, not concern, not confusion, just "I know," because they had been in the area the whole time. Looking back at this entire sequence of events, the level of planning is staggering. The couple had created a perfect trap using their own home as the killing ground. They had cameras to monitor their victims' patterns and reactions. They had keys to enter silently. They had the dog's routine memorized so they could manipulate them. They had isolation, with the house far from neighbors and help. They had built-in alibis claiming to be on vacation hours away. And they had created psychological pressure through texts that made their victim doubt herself and comply with requests that put her in danger. This wasn't just a home invasion. This was a carefully orchestrated hunt, and she was the prey. The only reason she survived is because she ran when every instinct told her to run, before social conditioning could make her second-guess herself. And the couple disappeared after this, never returning to the local diner, vanishing from the area, which means they knew they had been caught. They knew their method had been exposed, and somewhere out there they might have found a new hunting ground, a new house with cameras, a new isolated location, waiting for the next person who needs money or wants to make connections badly enough to ignore the warning signs. This story represents something that should terrify us all. The predator who doesn't break into your home because they already have the keys. The predator who doesn't grab you on the street because they can make you come to them. The predator who uses technology and psychology and your own social conditioning as weapons. And the worst part is we will probably never know how many times they succeeded before they were caught. Attempting this, how many people walked into that house for legitimate work and never walked back out? Now let's shift to a different kind of horror, one that makes you question your own perception of reality, one that makes you wonder if the scariest thing isn't what you saw, but the fact that no one else saw it. Because sometimes the most isolating part of a terrifying experience isn't the experience itself. It's the loneliness of being the only one who knows it happened. There's a bartender who works in a suburb just outside Baltimore. The place is busy, unique setup with no waiters, just bartenders and cooks. It's popular despite being nothing special, with a lively atmosphere, great music, a standing area near the DJ booth where people dance and chat. The constant flow of customers and high energy vibe make the job fly by, which this bartender loves. Meeting new people, staying busy, never having those long dead periods between guests. It's the perfect job for someone who needs constant stimulation and social interaction. On this particular weekend night, things started like any other busy shift. The bar filled up with a younger college crowd, which meant more dancing, more spilling, more chaos, and unfortunately worse tips. One group was ordering tequila shots faster than the bartender could line up salt and limes. Another guy was so drunk he used the same pickup line 3 times without realizing it. Standard weekend chaos. And then the elderly couple walked in. At first glance, there was nothing strange about them. Maybe it was a bit unusual for people their age to come into such a rowdy place, but the bartender didn't have time to think about it much. Fast forward maybe 30 minutes to an hour, and the bartender noticed them again while pouring a line of gin and tonics, hands working on muscle memory but brain stuck on this couple. That's when it hit. They were just sitting there motionlessly. They hadn't ordered anything. No food, definitely no drinks. The bartender would have remembered serving them. Looking closer, they weren't even looking at each other. They were both fixated on the wall next to them. From what the bartender could tell, they weren't talking either, just sitting there like statues, staring at nothing. The bar was slammed though, too much to do to spend time wondering about it. Maybe they were waiting for someone, maybe they didn't realize how the place worked. Maybe they were confused about the no-waiter system. When there was finally a break, the bartender decided to check on them, walking over with the most polite smile, approaching the table. Neither of them turned to acknowledge the approach, still staring at that wall like statues. The bartender cleared their throat and asked if they wanted anything to eat or drink. The woman didn't even flinch. She kept staring at the wall like the bartender hadn't spoken at all. The man turned his head slowly, like he was moving in slow motion. When his face came into view, the bartender felt a chill run through them. His skin was pale and deeply wrinkled, and his eyes were almost sunken completely into his face. He didn't speak, just stared and shook his head once, firmly but silently. Something about the way he looked at the bartender made their stomach twist. They muttered something in response and quickly returned to the bar. There was this awful feeling in their gut after that. These people looked like they didn't even belong in this century, let alone this bar. The bartender didn't look over at that booth for a long time after that. Eventually, things started to die down. Little, and they remembered the couple. Glancing over impulsively, they nearly dropped the glass they were holding. Both of them were staring directly at the bartender now. Direct eye contact with the woman, but she never averted her gaze. The bartender had never been more uncomfortable at work in their life. They looked away and pretended to be busy, trying not to freak out completely. By the time they glanced back again, the booth was empty. The relief was immediate. They were just glad those people were gone, as mean as that sounds. By the end of the night, though, still thinking about the whole thing, the bartender decided to ask their coworker Karen about it. While closing up, Karen's been working there for years and prides herself on noticing everything and everyone that comes through those doors. When asked about the couple, Karen gave a confused look and said she didn't know what the bartender was talking about. The bartender explained the elderly couple in the corner booth. Karen shook her head and said she didn't remember seeing anyone like that. She jokingly asked if the bartender was hallucinating, which got a playful laugh, but inside the bartender was losing it. They knew what they had seen. When pressed, Karen crossed her arms and started listing at least 10 random people who had ordered food that night and what they were wearing. The bartender laughed again and complimented her memory, but like they said, dying on the inside. By the time they locked up, the bartender started doubting themselves. As they walked to their car, they noticed something that made them nearly drop their keys in fear. Across the street, 2 dark figures standing under a lone streetlight. The bartender knew it was them. They wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. Without waiting another second, they jumped into the car, locked the doors, and sped out of the lot without another look. The drive home was awful, trying not to break down the whole time, just repeating, "Oh my God," over and over. So many questions. Had Karen somehow missed them? Were those people even real? Was the bartender going insane? There was no explanation. They thought they were going crazy. The story doesn't have a resolved ending. The bartender never saw those people again, never got any kind of explanation. They don't think they ever will. Now let's examine what makes this experience so uniquely disturbing. It's not just that the couple was strange. It's the complete disconnect between what the bartender experienced and what everyone else witnessed. This touches on something fundamental about how we process reality. We rely heavily on consensus to validate our experiences. When something happens and other people confirm they saw it too, we feel secure in our perception. But when we're the only witness, especially to something that seems impossible, it creates a kind of psychological vertigo. Karen's response is particularly significant here. She's not just saying she doesn't remember the couple, she's demonstrating her excellent memory by listing numerous other customers in detail. This eliminates the possibility that she simply wasn't paying attention. She was paying attention to everything except this couple. And in a busy bar where Karen notices every customer, how could 2 people sit motionlessly in a booth for an hour without her noticing them even once? There are several possible explanations, each more disturbing than the last. First possibility, the couple was real, but somehow knew how to be invisible to everyone except their target. They positioned themselves in a spot where only one bartender would naturally look. They timed their arrival and departure to avoid Karen's direct line of sight. They were there for a specific reason, to observe one specific person, and they were skilled enough to do it without drawing general attention. Second possibility, something was wrong with the couple on a level that made most people's brains refuse to register them. Some kind of uncanny valley effect where they looked human enough to be ignored by most people, but wrong enough that one person's pattern recognition kicked in and couldn't look away. This would explain why the bartender kept noticing them, while everyone else somehow filtered them out of their awareness. Third possibility, which the bartender started to consider, was that it was some kind of hallucination or dissociative episode, but this doesn't match the evidence. The bartender wasn't tired, wasn't on any substances, wasn't stressed. The rest of the night was completely normal. The interaction with the man when he turned his Head was detailed and specific. The woman's fixed stare was sustained. The booth was empty after they left. And most importantly, the couple was waiting outside afterward, unless the bartender hallucinated driving. Away too, those figures under the streetlight were real. This leads to the most disturbing possibility. The couple was real. They were there for the bartender specifically. And they have some method of avoiding attention or memory that we don't understand, whether it's training, psychology, some kind of technology, or something else entirely. They can be present without being noticed by most people. They can interact with one person while remaining invisible to everyone around them. And after they've made contact with their target, after they've been seen and acknowledged, they follow. Think about what the bartender described. The elderly couple sitting motionlessly, not eating, not drinking, not talking, just staring at a wall. This isn't normal behavior even for confused elderly people. This is surveillance. This is a stakeout. They were watching the room, watching the crowd, watching the staff, and at some point, they identified their target. Then they both stared at the bartender directly, making sure they were seen, making sure the contact was established. The sunken eyes the man had, the pale skin, the slow-motion head turn, the silent head shake, these details suggest someone who is very unwell physically or someone who has trained themselves to appear inhuman. Serial killers often describe feeling more comfortable the less human they allow themselves to seem. It creates psychological distance from their victims and makes them harder to read and predict. And then they waited outside under a streetlight, not hiding, not running away, just standing there letting the bartender see them again, confirming that the encounter wasn't over, that they knew where the bartender was, that they could follow. This is a predatory behavior. It's establishing dominance and creating fear. It's letting the prey know they've been selected. The bartender's life probably changed after this night in ways they might not even fully recognize. They probably check their surroundings more often now. They probably feel uncomfortable in crowds, wondering if someone is watching them the way that couple watched them. They probably have trouble trusting their own perception because Karen's reaction made them doubt what they saw, and they carry this experience alone. Because nobody believes them, because there's no evidence, because it sounds impossible. This is the horror of being a witness to something inexplicable. It's not just the event itself, it's the isolation that follows. It's knowing something happened and having no way to prove it. It's being gaslit by your own uncertainty. It's checking under streetlights for the rest of your life. Let's move now to a different kind of horror, one that happens far from cities and crowds, where help is ours. Away, and the forest itself becomes an accomplice to violence. This is about isolation as a weapon, about how predators use remote locations to trap their victims, and about what happens when you realize too late that you've been led into hunting grounds. The story comes from someone whose best friend's father was a logger, specifically a tree saw operator. For those who don't know, a tree saw is a massive machine capable of cutting down giant trees and slicing them to specific lengths. The job meant long, grueling hours, often alone in the deep, secluded forests of the Pacific Northwest. The way his logging crew worked, he was paid based on the number of trees he cut down rather than the hours he worked. So he would often push himself to work 16 to 20-hour days to finish jobs as quickly as possible. After he and his crew finished their part, the rest of the crew would come in to clear the felled trees and transport them to the mill. While he spent about half his time working alone, the other half was spent with his friend Griffin, another tree saw operator. They used radios to communicate, especially when they worked on opposite ends of the same job site. A number of years ago, the friend's dad and Griffin were assigned to a remote job site high up on a mountain. It took the company over 3 weeks, just to clear a road wide enough for their trucks and equipment to make it to the site. By the time they began work, they were positioned in an extremely desolate part of the mountain. They were already 10 days in, making good progress, when they started hearing strange chatter over their radios. At first, the voices were muffled, just faint static-laden murmurs that didn't make sense. They tried switching channels, but no matter what they did, the chatter followed them. Anyone who's used a standard radio knows how strange that is. It should be impossible for anyone to follow you when you're switching channels. As they progressed farther up the mountain, the voices became more distinct. They couldn't hear full conversations, but based on what they could hear, they both agreed that the tone of the conversation fragments felt off. The friends' dad said it sounded almost casual at times, but the content was unintelligible. They also started finding strange signs that people had been there before them. Random containers, footprints in the dirt, small makeshift campsites. Like mentioned before, they were in a place so remote it was practically inaccessible, so these discoveries were deeply unsettling. No one should have been up there. One day, Griffin came across a tent hidden just off a trail and called the friend's dad over. They decided to investigate. Inside, they found a single sleeping bag and a duffel bag filled with the most disturbing things imaginable. Multiple pairs of children's underwear, duct tape, rope, crude sketches of children being molested. There were even photos of fresh apples, indicating whoever owned it had been there recently. Griffin wanted to pack up and leave immediately. The friend's dad, ever the workaholic, insisted they finish the job. They agreed to limit radio communication to emergencies only and decided to keep working. That night they sat in the camper, unable to shake the dread that hung over them. The radio crackled to life again, and this time they could make out snippets of a conversation between two men. They were talking about mundane things, collecting water and firewood, but the realization that these men were likely connected to the tent freaked the friend's dad out. Griffin wasn't as fazed, but the friend's dad was losing it. The next night, the friend's dad decided to confront them. When he heard the men talking about gathering bush for a fire, he grabbed the radio and demanded to know who they were and what they were doing there. The radio went silent immediately, and the men didn't respond. That silence was almost more unnerving than the chatter. Griffin was upset that the friend's dad had announced their presence, and the two of them got into a brief argument before deciding they'd escalate the situation the next day. Around midnight, Griffin shook the friend's dad awake, whispering that someone was outside the camper. The first thing he noticed was the soft sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel outside. Heart pounding, he fumbled for his gun only to realize it wasn't loaded. He had no idea where his ammunition was. Griffin was unarmed, and the idea of calling the police was laughable given their location. They both sat frozen as they heard the camper door handle jiggle. The door creaked open but didn't fully swing. Inward, their camper was high off the ground and there was no ladder or stool to climb up. Then came the scratching, long deliberate scratches along the outside of the door. 4 agonizing minutes passed. Finally, the friend's dad nodded at Griffin, signaling he was going to check it out. He moved quietly toward the door, gripping a flashlight in his shaking hand. Just as he reached the door, it burst open and he was struck across the face with a knife. The pain was blinding. He fell out of the camper, hitting the ground hard. Before he could recover, a man was on top of him, pressing the knife against his neck. Another man appeared, kicking him repeatedly in the head. Griffin, without hesitation, leapt out of the camper and tackled the man with the knife. The second man bolted into the darkness, and the one Griffin had tackled scrambled to his feet and followed. They disappeared into the forest. Griffin helped the friend's dad back into the truck and they drove 2 hours to the nearest hospital. It was Bad, his face was a bloody mess, and there was a cut across his eyes so severe it permanently damaged his vision. They reported the attack to the police, but nothing came of it. 2 weeks later, as the rest of the logging crew finished the job, one of their coworkers was found bound, gagged, raped, and murdered in a ditch. No arrests were ever made. To this day, the friend's dad struggles with PTSD. His right eye, with its disfigured pupil, constantly reminds him of that night. The storyteller is sure he hasn't had a full night of restful sleep since. Now let's analyze what happened here from a predatory psychology perspective. These men on the mountain had created a perfect hunting ground. They were in a location so remote that it required 3 weeks of road building just to access. They were miles from any police response. They were in terrain they knew intimately, while their victims were newcomers. And they had time because they weren't just visiting, they were living up there. The tent contents tell us everything we need to know about their intentions. This wasn't about survival or hiding from the law. This was about having a secure location to bring victims, specifically children. The rope, the duct tape, the children's underwear, the explicit sketches. These weren't souvenirs from past crimes. These were tools, an inspiration for future ones. The fresh apples indicated they were actively using this camp, coming and going regularly. The radio interception was intentional stalking. They were monitoring the logging crew's communications, learning their schedules, their locations, their vulnerabilities. When the friend's dad confronted them over the radio, he gave away crucial information. He revealed that the loggers knew about them, that they were afraid, and that there were only 2 of them. This turned a surveillance operation into an active threat elimination scenario. The attack on the camper was attempted murder, not just assault. They waited until the middle of the night when the loggers would be deeply asleep. They approached silently on foot. They tried the door first, testing if it was locked. When they couldn't get in easily, they didn't give up and leave. They spent 4 minutes scratching at the door. This wasn't about scaring them away. This was about psychological torture before the killing. When the friend's dad finally approached the door, they were ready with the knife immediately. They struck to disable and then attempted to finish the kill with the knife to the throat, while the second man kicked him in the head. This was practiced. This was efficient. This was something they'd done before, and if Griffin hadn't intervened, if he'd been too scared or too slow, the friend's dad would have died on that mountainside and been buried in the woods where no one would ever find him. The fact that they ran when confronted by 2 men instead of 1 tells us something important. They weren't looking for a fair fight. They were ambush predators who relied on surprise and overwhelming force against isolated victims. When their advantage disappeared, when they faced resistance, they fled. But they didn't leave the mountain. They stayed. And 2 weeks later, they took another victim from the logging crew. That coworker who was found bound, gagged, raped, and murdered. That wasn't a random attack. That was retaliation. The predators had been exposed. Their camp had been discovered. The police had been called. Their perfect hunting ground was compromised. So they took one more victim before disappearing, making a statement, punishing the people who had threatened their operation. The logging company knew there was danger. They had to have known after the first attack was reported, but they sent the crew back to finish the job anyway, because the trees were worth more than the safety of their workers. This is something that happens constantly in industrial work. Workers are sent into dangerous situations because stopping the job costs money. And when someone dies, it's treated as an unfortunate accident, rather than a predictable result of negligence. The friend's dad lives with physical and psychological scars that will never heal. Every time he looks in a mirror, he sees his damaged eye and remembers the moment that knife came down. Every time he's in a confined space, He probably thinks about being trapped in that camper. Every time he hears a radio crackle, he probably tenses up, wondering if someone is out there listening. This is what surviving an encounter with a predator does to you. It rewires your threat detection permanently. And somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, there may still be tents hidden in the deep woods. There may still be men monitoring radio frequencies, waiting for the next crew of workers to arrive in their territory. The Forest Service and logging companies keep sending people into these remote areas without adequate protection or awareness, and occasionally someone doesn't come home. Now we need to talk about something that might be the most disturbing concept in all of these stories. The idea that security itself can be weaponized against you, that the measures you take to protect yourself can become the very tools used to trap you. This is about sophisticated predators who understand not just how to overcome security systems, but how to use them as hunting aids. Let's examine the lake house incident in detail. Kevin, 20 years old at the time, had a friend James from a very wealthy family. His father was an IP lawyer who contracted with the US government, and they owned properties all over the country and internationally. One of their houses was on a relatively large but secluded lake. The lake itself wasn't so big that you couldn't see houses on the other side, but it would be a workout swimming across. James's parents were never around, so he had unlimited access to the house. There was something about being out on the lake that made you feel invincible, Kevin said. It's a different feeling than the beach, more exclusive. Big fancy houses lined the perimeter, but most would usually sit dark and empty, vacation homes for people who barely used them. This meant James threw crazy parties there because there were usually no neighbors to call the police. But this night was different. Just the two of them having a chill night after Kevin had broken up with his girlfriend of 3 years. They were having beers on the dock when Kevin noticed a light flicking across the lake. At first he thought it was the sun reflecting, but even when he moved his head, he could still see it flashing, like someone was turning a light on and off repeatedly. James realized the flashing wasn't random. It was following a pattern. 3 short bursts followed by 3 longer ones followed by 3 short ones. James identified it as Morse code, SOS. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Kevin pulled out his phone and confirmed James was right. The flashing continued for another minute. Following that same pattern,